Dostałem sygnał z reżyserki, że możemy zaczynać, więc chciałbym Państwa bardzo serdecznie powitać na tegorocznym warszawskim festiwalu filmowym. Ja nazywam się Bradley Cooper. Jest tu jeszcze kilka innych osób, które Państwu przedstawię, ale to jeszcze za chwilę, a tak naprawdę to już żarty na bok, bo sprawa jest poważna. W imieniu całego zespołu wydawnictwa Macmillan oraz to po raz pierwszy w historii chyba Macmillana wszystkich naszych kluczowych trenerów, którzy są tu z nami dzisiaj obecni, chciałbym Państwa powitać na inauguracyjnej konferencji pod tytułem Spotlight on New Matura Skills. I'll switch to English from now on just in case. And we'll say that we are really thrilled to be here today because it's an important moment again. The moment that began with the introduction of the new core curriculum, which inevitably means that in 4 years' time we will witness the new form and shape of the Matura exam. That seems like a time far away, but it really is not. And in order to help you along the way, last year we launched a special support program, which I hope many of you have already benefited from. The program is called Roadmap to Matura 2023. And within that program last year, we looked at what the core documents really bring about. So we tried to interpret them and see what the implications will be for your work behind your classroom doors. We called that phase Understand, but now as the summer holidays are inevitably drawing to a close and you are about to see the real learners behind your in your classrooms, time has come to launch phase 2, and phase 2 will be called Apply, as of course this is the moment where all of those stipulations will finally come to fruition and will be tested with real learners in real classrooms. And to mark that special moment, we have decided to organize this opening conference. This conference, as no doubt you've noticed, has this subheading, Spotlight on Core New Matura Skills, and indeed we've structured it in such a way as to select and amplify what we understand are the 6 key new skills that are going to be important for your student success in the new exam. It's really quite remarkable. I don't think anybody has done this before. We are looking at the 6 skills, and each of these skills will be dealt with by one of our core trainers. So in sum, we are going to get 6 short, very intensive and practical sessions on a selection of, as you can see, things which generally have to do with how we process information, linguistic and otherwise, information which is to be found in a good text, spoken or written. And this is precisely what we want to look at. Why is that so? Because that's how we understand those new stipulations of the new core curriculum. We think that those 6 skills are indeed markedly more important than they ever were before, and as such they will almost certainly find their way into the new exam tasks. And we are looking in terms of the shape of the new Matura. This is precisely what we need to be developing with our students. Having said this, it is also important to amplify that as teachers you can and should expect that those core skills will be developed systematically if you happen to be choosing the right kind of textbook. And I am very proud at this point to be able to say that when we looked at the curriculum behind those 2 textbooks, we have found that they indeed deal with those skills very well indeed. You can check this for yourselves. If you are with us here in the cinema, you have received a special supplementary material at the back of which you have got a checklist of those core Matura skills, and I hope that in the course of today you will be able to see for yourselves just how well those 2 publications deal with those core skills. If you are watching us today, you will be able to download this material either right now or after the conference, and again I hope you will be able to check this for yourselves. When I say develop those skills on a systematic basis, I also mean not towards the end of the program, it's sort of panic management type of way, but rather starting in year one and developing them systematically throughout the 4-year program. The final thing that I would like to say is that those core information processing skills are, of course, deployable, so as to speak, on any good spoken or written text. In other words, if you know how to look, texts have a lot of potential, but you need to know how to exploit that potential to the full. And this is precisely what we aim to do throughout the conference today. A lot of the ideas that you will see in action within the next 2 hours are also written up and available in this material. It's got, it's sort of grown quite significantly. And is now over 35 pages in length. So I hope that it will really represent something that will help you throughout the way. And as you can see, we are almost ready to begin. I am very happy to say that our first trainer is ready to start. And it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce my great colleague and also one of the core authors of one of those important new course books from Macmillan, Marta Rosińska, who will spend the next 20 minutes, with luck, talking about how you draw conclusions based on a good text. Marta, over to you.
Thank you. I was meant to be Greta Garbo. You messed that up. Thank you very much for the introduction. Lovely to not see you, really. But hello, everybody. If you can see me, please wave. Hello to everybody watching us online in various parts of Poland. Well, yes, wyciąganie wniosków. In Polish, it has a certain connotations. Don't you agree? Wyciąganie, it almost hurts. Yeah? Well, I didn't quite know why Macmillan wanted me to talk about drawing conclusions until I saw this meme. I think women are generally very good at drawing their eyebrows and definitely very good at drawing conclusions or jumping to conclusions. So just because I'm a woman. Now, I think I want to show you how to jump to conclusions. So let me start. Now, I love teaching and I love reading, and both are considered pretty old-fashioned pastimes. Do you agree? Some even say that both will soon become redundant. Well, I am a cautious optimist, I think, like most of you, I guess, as well. And my optimism is actually, in a sense, encouraged by our examination board. Centralna Komisja Egzaminacyjna. Why do I think that? Well, I think that because the new Matura is going to be heavily textual. Lots of tasks that our students will have to deal with are going to be simply text-based. So we will be teaching and we will be promoting reading skills among our students. Now, can I ask you to look at these two texts very briefly? The one on the left, as you can see, is a very straightforward message. What is it connected with? It's a text. Sea, more sailing, yes? And you can see it straight away. You can see the individual parts of the text and you can make sense very quickly. Well, have a look on the one on the right. What can you see? Again, you would say it's connected with sailing, yes? Sea, ships, sailing. Now, which text is easier to read? The first one, because it's much more straightforward. Now, our students in the exam will have to deal probably with both types of texts. More straightforward tasks, and I wouldn't worry about them because our learners are prepared for that. But they will also have to do proper reading comprehension, which means they will have to read for nuances, and that's different. This is a different type of reading. Now, we have become, and I say we, meaning everyone here, we have become brilliant online readers. Do you read a lot of stuff online? Yes. How do we read stuff online? We jump from text to text, from text to a video, from the video to a podcast, from podcast to Facebook, from Facebook to Instagram. That's how we read. And as a result, our minds and the minds of our students read in a completely different way. So in a sense, we have the skill of reading online, but we're losing or have been losing or have lost the skill of reading offline. Therefore, we need to make sure that we teach our students what experts call counter skills. And basically, counter skills are old-fashioned reading skills. Okay? So going back to literacy skills, in our spring sessions, when we talked about Matura, I was talking a lot about reteaching literacy skills. And that's what I think we're going to have to face soon. Experts talk about the so-called post-literate mind. Can you say it to yourselves? Post-literate mind. What does it mean to you? Post-literate means that you know how to read, but you don't read in a linear way. You read in a non-linear way. You jump from one part of the text to another text. Sometimes these minds are called hyperlinked minds because we've got hyperlinks in text we read online. Does anyone know what it means? If anyone has ever worked with an editor, like I have in my life of the last 18 years, lots of beautiful editors, it means too long, didn't read it. Too long, didn't read it, which means, you know, make sense of this, Rosińska, because that's far too long for a course book. Now, who says this these days? Who says too long, didn't read it? Students. They can't cope with texts which are long. Now, in my 18 years of, my career of an author, I've been asked constantly to shorten texts. When I started writing books, course books, the texts could be 1 page long. Now the teachers want texts which are shorter, not because teachers want them shorter, but they want the students to be able to read them in class. Time-consuming technique. So this post-literate mind may need slightly different treatment. Now, it's hard to read for comprehension anyway, don't you think? It is. But especially, it is hard when your reading habits are F-shaped. Can you please draw with me the letter F? Can you do it? F. F stands for fast. That's obvious, yes? But also, F means the way we read, how our eyeballs work. So basically, you read the beginning of the text, yeah? Can you see? Then you scroll down to see roughly what the text is about, and then you go to the middle paragraph and you know what the text is about. Isn't this the case? So you're scanning. Scanning has become the way we read. It's not going to be enough when you have to deal with tasks like this in the exam, where concentration is what is going to be needed, attention to detail, and really going beyond the so-called text grazing type of reading. Both in Password and Checkpoint, me and Monica, we made sure that the tasks will force students to read in depth, because these are the types of tasks that the students will have to deal with in the new Matura. And these are not new skills. These are skills that have been made explicit by the examination board. Explicit means they will be dealt with in a different way in the exam, okay? So what do? How do we help students who are at sea about reading, who are not sure how to read properly, and not to read for speed, but to read for meaning? It's different. So how do we help students navigate through that sea of texts? How do we help them not to get tired, to develop what we call cognitive patience? Do your students lose patience when they read? Too long, didn't read. So how do we help them not to get tired? How do we help them not to become lazy? Students have become lazy readers. Do you have the same experience? Yes, no, perhaps depends on the student. And finally, we have to teach them how not to be too optimistic. Do you recognize that ship? Experts call it the optimism of the Titanic passengers. My students often say, oh, it's an easy text. I think I did very well, teacher. It's brilliant. Then you read, and it's 3 out of 6, 2 out of 6. And he said, but I understood everything. And I said, well, you understood the words, but you did not understand the meaning of that. So I think that's the challenge for us teachers to face. When do we start? We don't start just before Matura, obviously. We start from level 1, from the first class, because literacy skills don't get learned that quickly. It's a process. Okay, how do we do it? Number 1, I tend to use metaphors in my teaching. So I explain to my students things, processes, using certain visual techniques and tools. And I say to them, okay, when you are on a yacht, as they say, yacht, and when you tell them yacht, they say, "Tsa?" So when you are on a yacht, how do you feel? How do you feel when you are on a yacht? Seasick. That wasn't the answer I wanted to hear. Relaxed. Relaxed. Well, reading for pleasure is relaxing, but reading for the exam purposes is meant to be unrelaxing. So it's about concentration. So I don't want you to read as if you were on a yacht. Can you look at the next picture? It shows a ferry. What is ferry crossing? It's about getting from point A to point B. I don't want you students to read like this from A to B, because that means you just scroll through the text without making sense of it, okay? I want you to become, we've got the yacht, we've got the ferry. I want you to become submarine reader. Go deep as much as possible, okay? So reading submarines. My students, you're going to be reading submarines. Now, once they've understood what kind of reading techniques we are going to practice, I take them through the explanation of that. I talked about it a lot in my spring session. There are thin questions and thick questions. Thin questions are very simple ones. We call them Googleable. So you can Google up and you get the answer. Like when you read the text, and who is the text about? About a man. There are thick questions which you cannot Google up. You have to make connections, draw conclusions. So we try to practice more thick questions than thin questions, obviously. I also explain to the students what it actually means to draw conclusions. Conclusions are all about that. Have a look. So you have to teach your students how to infer, generalize, discuss cause and effect, predict what might happen, why something may have happened, and look for similarities and differences between texts or parts of the text, or the information in the text for that matter. So the questions I would encourage, we call them question stems, would be of this nature. What conclusion can you draw? What may happen next? What this and that have in common, okay? So it's a slightly different approach to teaching reading. These kinds of questions are likely to appear in the exam. Number 4 is called unbundling. If anyone uses, for example, Spotify, it's a business technique where you sell individual items. So you can buy one song from Spotify. You don't have to buy the whole album. You break it down into chunks, into parts, okay? And this unbundling is what I do with my students, especially those who are struggling with reading. And a lot of my students read too fast. Do you remember F? Too fast, and then jump to conclusions. So what do? I tend to break down the text as you break down a long journey. How do I do it? Well, for example, I want you to have a look at these 3 tasks. As you can see, the first one, for example, has got number 4. So do you think it's the first question, the first comprehension question? Definitely not. It's comprehension question number 4, which follows a particular text. What I do is I often read the text before the class, the lesson, and I determine which questions are going to cause my students the most grief. And once I establish which question it is, I get the students to read the text, identify which paragraph answers that particular question. In some cases, it may be the whole text, as you can see. And I work just on that question in class, and the rest becomes homework. Some people think, well, it's not right because students should be able to read the whole text. Well, I believe in this unbundling, focusing students' attention on particular part of the text, just particular paragraph. or if we listen, of course, part of the recording, okay? So, again, you've seen them before. I find these questions difficult. Listen and decide if speakers agree or disagree. What conclusion can you draw from the text? These are the questions which are going to cause problems. And that's where I focus, stop, break it down into chunks. I often encourage students to answer questions. You know, in the new exam, there are going to be quite a lot of open-ended questions where students will have to simply answer the questions in a very old-fashioned manner. How exciting is that? Wonderful for me, loving reading, but for my students, it is likely to be problematic, okay? Now, you recognize this handsome man? Erasmus, he was apparently, I read, considered to be handsome. Anyway, he used to make notes. And I didn't say take notes. There's a difference between taking notes and making notes. Make notes means he read the text and he, using his own words, wrote down what he thought about the particular part of the text. So I think when I deal with this post-literate mind, yes, I want my students to be able to make sense of this. Don't read for speed, read for meaning, okay? So, again in class, when I have the time, I say, look guys, we're going to read this text. It consists of 4 paragraphs. I want you to read each paragraph, and you have about, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes to read just this paragraph. Then I want you to use your own words, Polish or English, doesn't matter. Tell me what this paragraph was about. First of all, they get shocked, thinking, what a boring exercise. But then they see how difficult it is to actually draw sense from that text. So I encourage them to work and be like Erasmus and make sense of reading. Okay. Very often I encourage my students to become submarines in that very way. So they don't have to answer questions which are ready or readily made for them in the course book. They are encouraged to come up with their own questions. It's a difficult task for most learners, but it's actually very, very helpful in establishing certain ways in which they can actually carry on reading themselves. Number 5, apart from the techniques which I have already shown you, I am a bit of a smuggler. You know, sometimes we have to be explicit, sometimes we have to be more implicit, not to kill the students with too much obvious exam practice. So what I do, I work with photographs. This one comes from Password, but there are also other beautiful photographs in Checkpoint where you can easily get the students to look at photographs like these 3 and get the students to do what? To tell you what these photographs have in common. Anything that teaches students to speculate will help them acquire the skill of drawing conclusions. It's not as simple for them as we think. It's also a good idea to work with texts. This one comes from Password, where certain questions are sunk in the text, and the students are encouraged further to explore. Again, if you look at these questions, you see that they are there for the students to speculate. So this speculation, encouraging students to guess, to keep thinking in a creative way, helps them ultimately to make sense of the text, okay? What also helps is working with anything connected to cause and effect. It's one of my favorite activities, this one, where on the left you can see a list of situations that happened, and on the right you can see the possible causes of these situations. The list is much longer, it has about 15 items, and the students have to match things. Sometimes they will notice that it's possible to match things in different ways, but this again makes them think about cause and effect. I now notice that my students have trouble thinking about cause and effect. Some of them don't even understand the difference between the words. Okay, so this is sort of creative speculation that works. Sometimes I give them something like this. Someone tips over a glass, but I cover the effect. I cover the effect. So they can see the cause, but they see no effect. Their task is to come up with the possible effect. How many ideas do you think they could come up with at one time? 5. Somebody said possibly. Lots of ideas. Once I used myself, I usually wear blue or green. This is so boring, really. I always wear the same colors. But once I came to school wearing something red, and they spotted this. Miss, you wearing something red? And I said, yes. And I thought, what a brilliant idea for a lesson about cause and effect. Why did I put this top on? You know, the answers were wonderful. From some really bad ones and politically incorrect ones to really proper answers. So again, teaching them to speculate is simply helpful. Okay, I want you now to have a look at this text. And if you could read it as quickly as possible. And read it not in an F shape. When you finish reading, can you put your hands up? Everybody? Okay. Carry on. When you finish, please put your hands up. Okay, the question is, what were these questions? I'm making you, draw conclusions, speculate, guess. What were the questions? You know it, good. Your name and which one burst. Okay, so again, using stories for the students to draw conclusions is actually very helpful in this respect too. Now, we don't like too much routine, neither do our students. So I always encourage all teachers to go beyond the course book, of course, and to go even further. So give them the text like I have given you just now. And if you have smart students, you can ask them to look at this, use this graphic organizer, which is always very helpful, and get the students to tell you why they think the headmaster was smart. This information wasn't there in the text, was it? You have to make your own judgment and draw conclusions with your learners. All very useful, at least in my practice, things. Okay, to sum up, each reader has 3 lives. We have the life of information, and our students can read for information easily. We have the life of entertainment, and our students, if they want to, they can read for pleasure. But we also have the life of reflection, and our students need help with that. Do you agree? This comes from Marianne Wolf, a beautiful book about reading skills. So I hope that you will be able to help your students with those 3 lives, but the most of all, the last one, the life of reflection. Well, the thing is we can't quite change the new exam, so we might as well adjust our sails. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Greta Garbo. Okay. Now that this is in place, I would like to ask Alan Rickman. Okay. So we move on swiftly with Dr. Jacek Łagon about układanie informacji w kolejności, sequencing information. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Very difficult two things at the same time. Okay. So, as you've just heard, as you can hope remember from what I told you, the best way to put information in the right order is to focus on the vocabulary and to, make your students work with grammar and understand how grammar works within a sentence. I wanted to say at this point that probably you look like this and you're a little bit puzzled, but as you may imagine, I can't really see your faces. So I hope this is what you look, because I haven't said anything. Well, I began with a summary, which is not in the right order. But if you think about that, the information I gave you was like a perfect introduction. I just used the wrong tenses and I started with the wrong vocabulary. Words like so, as you can see. And this is basically how it works when thinking about putting information in the right order. If you want to teach your students, if you want to help them work with the text and understand what comes first and what comes second, you basically have to focus on the lexis, the vocabulary, and here you have to focus first on those grammar words like when, yet, already, and you also have to focus on words which basically show you those like discourse markers. They show you, as it turns out, as I've already said, that something has already been mentioned or something has already happened. But there's also one more thing. You have to make your students realize how grammar works. And Polish grammar, as we all know, is really different from English grammar. And basically, students don't pay attention to grammar. And, you know, we love grammar, they don't. You know, they just would say, I go today, I go tomorrow, I go yesterday. And basically, well, everybody understands, so why would we bother? Another problem is, and I'm really, really thankful to Marta for mentioning the students we have right now, is that basically they are really, really quick. They read quickly, they don't focus, they don't think in a linear way, they just like jump from picture to text to hypertext to a link. So basically this is the way they are. They think quickly. Well, they usually think much more quickly than I do, you know, especially when they have to find some information. When I play online games with my teenage sons, even involving wordplay, they basically beat me because they think in a quick way. But thinking this way doesn't really help you when you have to analyze a text, when you have to focus and you have to see what comes first and what comes next. So the question here is, what can we do to make those, you know, Speedy Gonzales, fast rabbits, hers, whatever you want to call them, into slow, smart turtles? Well, I believe we just have to slow everything down, and we have to use all those tricks and ideas that we can to make our student focus on things. So how do you do that? Well, you do that with the help of basically good old teaching. You know, just what I keep saying all the time, you know, we as teachers shouldn't be afraid of teaching. You know, it doesn't have to be fun all the time. Fun is good, but sometimes we have to just tell our students, okay, take a look, find the words, see how they work, compare them, see if any answers are possible. If you have an exercise like that, you know, find the correct answer and then tell me what you need to change in the sentence to make these words work, when those other words, those incorrect answers work. Another thing is that you have to ask your students, whenever you work with them with the longer text, to look for those discourse markers that tell you that something has happened. You've got like, as it turned out, or well, as it turned out in the text. You know, you have to make your students tell you what these words mean. You can divide them into groups, and then you can have a bit of a game. It's like, okay, you work in a group, in 3 groups, A, B, and C. Group A, you look for as many of those expressions as you can find, B the same, C the same. After 2 minutes, the group that has most words wins. And when students give you those words, you discuss what they actually show you what happened first, what happened later or not. Or you can divide the text. I mean, your students, according to those texts, so group A gets paragraph 1, group B gets paragraph 2, and so on and so forth. And they have to find the expressions and present them to your students. You can also use something very, very old-fashioned, something that students, well, they don't really love it, that is writing. You tell them, you know, to sit down, to draw 3 columns and write down all the words to do with grammar that can found that mean before, at the same time and after. And probably if I asked you, you know, what sound your students make whenever they're supposed to write something, you'd all go like, yeah, so that's what my students do. I suppose all students do. Some of them would say, oh, I have to get my pen, where's my pen and stuff like that, but it's worth it. You know, the idea is that, you know, whenever they do that, you know, whenever they put those words in columns, you know, they have to slow down. Well, because they don't know how to write, you know, they know how to type, they know how to send SMSs, but writing is difficult for them. So basically, you know, they will have to slow down, they will have to focus. And when you have those columns, probably you'll get to a point when a student will write the word when in the column that's after, another student will say that it's before, and then, well, you have a wonderful moment of discussion, and you tell your students, you know what, some words can serve several purposes. Then you have to mix these with the right grammar. And once you have the staple, you can play a game with your students. You can play a game which is called, well, I called it domino chain story. You give your students a sentence, two clauses matched with when or while, and then you say, group A, continue, group B, continue, group C, continue, the same sentence, but you have to use, group A, you continue, or student A, you continue, but you have to use one of the conjunctions you have in the table. This table, they have a big table here. Once you've used a conjunction, you've created a new sentence, you cross it out. Then the new sentence becomes the continuation of the story, and the students have to continue using another conjunction. So this is basically a regular chain story, but it's not like you students now write your chain story, but you give them words that they have to use, because your students have to be given tasks, to be creative. Otherwise, I'll probably write nothing, or they just use when all the time. And by the way, obviously, you have teenage students, so get ready for lots of blood and dead people and absurd humor. Now, another thing we have to think about is like talking to our students about grammar and making them understand that English grammar is much different from Polish grammar, and making them understand that have and had in tenses are actually different. To my students, especially the first 3 years of education, I have done it, I had done it, yeah, it's different, but is it? Okay, and this is how it works. So basically the first thing you do with this students, like you give them lots of examples, simple examples, mechanical examples, and again, don't be afraid to do that. Creativity is cool, creativity is nice, but later. First, our students have to go over the structures slowly with our guidance. And again, handwriting. Never ever allow your students just to do anything. Yeah, I know, I have it in my head. The answer is no. I want to see them on paper. Okay. The next thing, something I really like doing, is giving your students 2 sentences which have exactly the same verbs, exactly the same pronouns and nouns and everything, and they're just different. So Mary was kissing Mark, in the process. Mary had kissed Mark when John came in. So first it was the kiss, and then John came in. And then I say, so what's the story behind? So can you please suggest what the story is? Who's Mary? Okay, who's Mark? Lover. Husband. Okay, so who's John? Husband. Okay. Too many soap operas, people. Too much love of drama and depression. Mary is mom. Mark is her son. And John is her loving husband, waiting to take her to the cinema. The babysitter is outside just waiting to come in and take care of the child. Sweet, isn't it? See? Okay, fine. So that's the story. Everybody likes drama, anyway, in my classes, I suppose. Okay, so another thing you can do is just give your students a sentence. I smiled when and then. Again, either you tell them to work in different groups and say, now finish each sentence with a different tense. You don't have to use the same verbs. You can use different verbs, but finish in a way that they show you something. Or you divide your students in groups A, B, and C and say group A, past simple, group B, past continuous, group C, past perfect. So, and then obviously you'll come up with those sentences, and then you can discuss things. So I smiled when I saw my crush, basically quite obvious. This is what you usually smile, usually when you see your crush. When I had finished my tofu salad, it's not that obvious. Some people are happy because they have finished and they don't have to eat it anymore, and some are happy because, they're full finally. I was watching photos from the party on Instagram, I smiled. It's usually not me in the photos, when you smile. When you are in the photos from a party, people usually don't smile. I don't know why. But the idea is that, again, you tell your students, you give them another sentence and you ask them to finish. For example, I had butterflies in my stomach. If you start with that, basically, again, you can have the same endings, but for different reasons. Like I had butterflies in my stomach when I had finished my tofu salad. Okay, right. But, putting information in the right order is not only about sentences. It's not only about, creating one thought or 2 thoughts. You have to create a text. And I believe that the best way to understand a text is to be able to create it. If you create a text in which you put things in the correct order, you then can understand. When you get a text like that, you can see what happens first, what happens next. But at the same time, I know that with my students, if I tell them now create a text, most of them will create nothing. I mean, some of them will create an actual text, an SMS, right? But that's the only text that they know. So basically, you need to give them some kind of scaffolding. You tell them this is what you do in the text, one thing, another, and on the way, you have to use 3 different tenses. That's your challenge. And then you ask your students to work in pairs. You tell them, now, can you please tell each other the sentences? But again, if one person speaks and the other one listens, basically the other one is kind of passive. So you tell the listener that they have to write past simple, past continuous, past perfect. And whenever they hear a tense, either French story, they just put across a line, a mark, whatever they decide. And at the end, they say, okay, you've used the past simple 7 times, past perfect twice, and the past continuous 3 times, which basically is, again, focusing on the text, focusing on the grammar, and focusing while speaking and listening. And that's another very important thing, because nobody can promise us that we won't have to decide what comes first, what comes second and third in Matura in listening. There may be text that students will listen to, and they will have to decide what was first, what was second. Maybe not in the whole exercise, maybe just one question, but this is something our students have to be aware of. So, you have to do that with your students in listening. And one more thing when looking at this exercise, if you take a look, it's about putting information in the correct order, but it's not about past tenses. It's about present perfect, it's the present simple, it's future tenses. This is something which we, again, have to make sure that our students understand. Our tense system is much less complicated than the British. We all know that. So basically, they need to be told that, well, it's not only about the past, it can be also about the present and the future. And finally, I'm really happy that I'm talking after Marta, because she said that she is a smuggler. She likes to smuggle those little ideas somewhere in the text, and that's an example of that. If you tell your students, no, let's analyze the order of events in the text, most students analyze, this is a word they don't like, task, exam, and they stop learning. So the thing is, sometimes you give them a challenge. You tell them, okay, can you please look at the questions and put the questions in the right order, in the order as they refer to the things in the text. That's this kind of exercise that we actually need. But it's a challenge. It's more fun than students can imagine, learning for the exam and having fun at the same time. So I would like you now to hear something again. So I hope I made it clear that it is possible, to work with the students, to give them a chance to learn how to understand the text and, well, how to put things in the right order. How can you do that? Well, you have to focus on vocabulary, the vocabulary they use, both the grammar words and then those lexical indicators of what has been said. And we have to focus on the grammar system. We have to slow our fast students down so that they can analyze and they can see things, they can understand how grammar works. So, you heard it again, but this time in the correct order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wagun. And now, time has come to call on our third trainer for the day. Her name is Carrie Fisher, also known as Monika Cichmińska, the one behind the other wonderful course, Checkpoint. And I'm really looking forward to hear what you have to say on distinguishing facts from opinion. And we'll see how the submarine reading and slowing hers down will now translate to skill number 3. Over to you, madam.
Okay, hello. So I thought you would ask me whether I was going to give you any top secret information from the Star Wars trilogy. The set, but not really. Okay. Hello. It's very difficult to see you. In fact, it's impossible. But before I go on to talk about my skill, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and I will try to see you wave at me if the answer is yes, okay? So the question is this. If you see a headline and an image like this, would you feel interested to keep reading? Hands up or wave or nod your heads? Okay, I can see barely anything, all right? All right, would you be a little bit worried, afraid, a little? Okay. Would you be interested enough to keep reading this text? Would you? Hands up, okay. Okay, would you be interested enough, curious enough, to check the source? So would you go to NASA website, for example, to find out whether there really is an asteroid? Not always. Okay, and the final question is, maybe you are one of those people who would not go to NASA website because you know they are not going to tell you the truth anyway, and you just don't believe in all these things you find there because it's all one big conspiracy. You can wave at me now, but I suppose you won't. Oh wait, look, there are some people here. Okay, good. So, if you had bothered, well, actually this news story appeared on the internet in 2015 and it went viral. And a lot of people were worried, and there was quite a little bit of panic in the United States because it was supposed to hit the south of the United States and Mexico, and quite a lot of people went to buy their, safety, survival kits, and so on and so on and so on. But if they were people like you, they would have gone to the NASA website and they would have checked, this is fake news. There is no asteroid that is going to hit. About climate change, it's quite a big topic nowadays and people talk about it. So he goes to the internet, and because he's one of those kids who prefer to find everything on YouTube, would your kids be similar? Your students or kids, I suppose, they would. So he would go to YouTube and he would try to find something about climate change. And what will he find there? I found an interesting piece of research conducted by a German scientist at university in Germany, in Aachen. And what he did was he collected a random sample, and he did this 1 or 1.5 years ago. So anyway, he collected a random sample of 200 YouTube videos, which were all related to climate change. And he checked what they contained. And it turned out that over 50%, that is 107, either denied that climate change was caused by humans or claimed it was a conspiracy. Which means that my son, if he's lucky, he will find, a video, right, a clip, which presents the real information, the truth, scientific facts. But chances are he's also likely to find one of those videos. And I think that this is a crucial skill, and it's not just a reading skill that we are responsible for teaching. It's not just teaching, to go for meaning, but also to be able to distinguish between different things that are presented in different texts, whether they are facts or whether they are opinions, especially that technology may soon be not on our side. I don't know if you're familiar with that, that some, I don't know if you've heard the story or have seen the story, but scientists at Washington University were able to produce a fake speech by Barack Obama. And a lot of people were taken in. Because it turns out that if you have enough recorded material of a person, and there is artificial intelligence kind of software, which imitates the movement of your mouth when you speak. And so you can actually make Barack Obama say whatever you want him to say. Like, yes, I am in love with Hillary Clinton. So just imagine how likely we will be to believe politicians in the future if we know that this kind of technology may become sort of practically usable or used. So what I'm trying to say, and now I'm going to start talking about my skill, is that as adults and as parents and as teachers, we have this huge responsibility of teaching our children and teaching our students of how to read texts to decide what is a fact, what is an opinion, what is a distorted fact or a misunderstood fact, and what in fact may be fake news. And I don't know if you are familiar with PISA student assessment. I'm sure some of you are, because these tests are also carried out among Polish students. They carry them out every 3 years among 15-year-olds to check literacy in 3 different areas: in reading, in science, and in mathematics. And as you all know, Polish students turned out to be pretty good at that, especially reading skills, in 2012 to 2015. They were in the first 15 or the first 13 countries, number 9 and 12 in those different tests. The results for 2018 have not been issued yet. Anyway, what these people do before they actually come up with a new test, for example, to check literacy in reading, they also do a lot of analysis, and they published a report in which they say what exactly is the ability to read nowadays. And if you dare to look, I would like to underline 2 words: understand and reflect. And I think that is what our students have a problem with, as Marta said before me, reflection. And as I was saying, reading is very important as life skill, and I think especially nowadays, because every single day we are flooded with new and new and new information items. And I don't think my son and a lot of other teenagers are actually likely to check every single time whether what they read is true. However, we can help them with at least one thing. We can help them distinguish facts from opinions, which I think is a good beginning to develop the skill of distinguishing facts from fake news, for example, or false information. And there are 3 steps to do it. I think it's a teachable skill, something that can be taught and practiced like every skill, but it takes time, it's a process. I'm so happy that Marta was here first, and she sort of said so many things which I can now quote. So I think the first thing that you need to start doing with your students is to encourage them to keep a data bank, okay? So when you do the first activity of this kind with your students, when they need to distinguish facts from opinions, you will probably see something like this if you're using Marta's course book. And of course the students need to decide whether these words or expressions refer to a fact or an opinion. And of course you need to discuss with the students the first time you do it, what makes a fact, that it's something based on data, research, statistics, questionnaires, and so on and so on. And opinions, in fact, may be of 2 kinds. I don't know if you agree with me, because it may be something like the author's opinion, I guess, I believe, in my opinion, to my mind, but it may also be something which I hate in my students, and my students love it. Everybody knows. It's common knowledge. As we all know. And I say, okay, but who is we all, okay? And I don't know about your students, but my students seem to love these phrases, especially in writing, when they write their for and against, or essays of opinion, or when they, you know, prepare for any exams and they have to justify their, and everybody knows that this and this. And I say, well, it's not a scientific fact, it's still an opinion, isn't it? So the students need to know which phrases and which words or phrases point to a fact or an opinion, and of course then they can go and look for those phrases and words and phrases in a given text to work with that. But when I say keeping a data bank, what I mean is that the students keep a real data bank in their notebooks, somewhere at the end of a notebook. I believe in handwritten notes, as both the speakers before me said. I think it's very good practice. And because what I want my students to do is when they go to another text, which is in the course book, even if it doesn't have this particular instruction or this particular activity, you may still ask your students, okay, do you remember the last time we did fact and opinion kind of activity? Okay, go into the text and see whether you will be able to find any phrases or any words which will point either in the direction of a fact or an opinion. And of course, the students will find, working in pairs or groups, they will find probably, according to one study, but then there usually is a smart student in your group, or you can just help them with an additional question, who will notice that there are also some grammatical structures which will point you whether something is a fact or an opinion. Because might, obviously, is maybe baby, isn't it? And then you can ask, okay, what else is the maybe? I say may or could, fantastic. And what grammatical structure goes with facts? I say, oh yeah, present simple. Because it goes with, you know, scientific facts like ice melts and so on and so on. I say, exactly. So see, it's not just words, phrases, but also certain grammatical structures. And later on, of course, they will develop, hopefully, their own like data bank of words, phrases, and grammatical structures. Does that make sense? And they can still keep adding, yes? Because, you know, later on, as they become more advanced, they will have it is likely, okay? Or in all likelihood, and so on and so on. So all those phrases, the language will become a little bit more advanced or complex. Number 2, dig deep. Marta will like it, yes? So digging deep. And digging deep means your students need to realize that once they do their distinguishing facts from opinions kind of activity, of course, they need to be careful about the words, the phrases, and the grammar, but they also have to be made aware of the fact that very often the information which is given in the task itself, that is here, is not going to be the same kind of wording and the same kind of grammatical structure which they will find in the original text. Because sometimes my students, when they do an activity, as Marta was saying at the beginning, they think, well, I did very well. And then it turns out that they don't even have 50%. And sometimes the students tell me, I didn't find this information in the text. And they often say it when they are too lazy to find that there is a lot of paraphrase in those texts. And you know, the more advanced level they are going to have, the more advanced the paraphrase will be. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is a question from an activity, and this is where the information related to the sentence can be found. What I do with my students to practice paraphrasing text is I actually ask them to write again, to visualize, okay, that almost every item of information can be given in a slightly different form, using different words, different structures, okay? And once, if you do it once, twice, 3 times, chances are that the students will be a little bit more aware of the fact that, first of all, they need to find the place in the original text where the relevant information is hidden, because hardly ever will it be given in the same way as in that question, okay? Sometimes it happens, okay, that the situation, sometimes it happens that the information in the exam sentence comes from quite a long part of a text, stretch of a text. I think Karolina is going to talk about summarizing. And this is a bit like this, in fact, that a sentence in which the students need to decide whether it is true. And there are 2 things which you can do easily. One thing is to, every time you work with it, maybe not every time, but as often as you can, when you work with any text, whether it's a text from a course book, exam task type text, sort of reading text, just any text, you can always ask your students to find one example of a fact as expressed in the text and one example of an opinion. Okay, because it's not so difficult to do. You just, the students, once they are trained and once they have their data bank, it should be quite easy. And the second thing I do with the students, and I like doing it, is to work with authentic texts. I know that there is not much time for this in the classroom, but whether I work with teenagers or with university students, I ask my students once in a while, sometimes it's once in 2 weeks, sometimes a little more often, to choose a text which is interesting for them, not very long. And then I ask them to do different things with it. It could be content-wise, something like write what you learned in the text. It could be language-wise, sort of, like write 3 words, right? Write down 3 words which you found in the text and you didn't know. But it could also be connected with reading skills. And this is a text which a student of mine found, okay, a student who was 18. And the website which I use, as you can see, is Science News for Students. It's not quite difficult. It is quite simple in terms of language and texts, as you will see for yourselves if you're curious enough to check. And anyway, this was a text about whether violent games, make people violent or not. That's quite an interesting subject for some teenagers. I don't know why, really. And this is an example of a text, and what the student found was that as many as 80% of US teens play computer games. That was given as a fact, because there are some statistics, some results of some service questionnaires. And then playing violent games have lasting effects on the brain. That was given as an example of an opinion, because the author wrote, gave this particular piece of information using the modal verb might, which I think is good enough, because this is drawing the students' attention to different micro sort of reading skills. You could add something else. You can write a summary of the last paragraph. You can do anything, and I think it's good practice, and my students love it because they can choose their own texts and what they read. And finally, one thing which I love doing is having students writing exam type questions for other students. And when I say that, a lot of students and a lot of teachers say, oh, this is your job. Your students shouldn't do that, you're lazy. And I've got 2 arguments to sort of counter-strike or to strike back again, yes? So one argument is that if you are supposed to write questions about a text, you have to read it carefully, yes? So let's say that you divide your students in pairs, and every pair needs to prepare 5 sentences which contain either facts or opinions based on the text. What will they have to do? They will have to do a lot of reading first and discussion in pairs. Even if they do not understand something, they will have to talk to each other and discuss it with each other. Secondly, if you write questions, exam questions for any text, you really go into the kind of exam mindset, sort of. And I suppose all of you, all of my colleagues who write exam questions know what I'm talking about. Once you need to write exam task questions, you really know, you begin to realize, you get some insight into what the examiners, Centralna Komisja Egzaminacyjna in this case, really want from you. Okay, there's no better way. You don't have to do it often, you can try and do it. It works for me, it works for my students. And of course, distinguishing facts from opinions is also a part of listening activities and listening comprehension part of the exam, Matura exam, where it's going to be. Of course, it's a little bit more difficult because you need to listen, you can't read twice, you can't read 3 times, but basically the procedure is the same, okay? The students work with the data bank they have, and one way of the way I deal with this problem and my students complaining about, the text being spoken too fast and so on, is to look at the tape script. And again, in the tape script to have a look and add any phrases or any words or any grammatical structures to our data bank, because it's going to get longer and longer, but it is going to get limited at some point, yes? The list will not be unfinished. Okay, and to sum up, I would like to sort of do a summary, a decent summary of what I've just said, that I think it is important to encourage your students to keep your fact, opinion, language data bank. Does that sound like a good idea? Of course it does. That's how I learned all those, first of all, second of all, and so on and so on. I had my own data bank when I was a student. And you need to make the students justify their choices. They need to be aware what makes a fact and what makes an opinion. Everybody knows is not a fact, it's an opinion. And it's common knowledge is not a fact, it's an opinion. And we all know, again. And I think it's important to draw your students' attention to paraphrase as well, which I think is inevitable in this kind of task. And I would suggest that giving your students a small fact opinion task as often as possible is a good idea, because it's all a matter of training a certain skill. You can't do it in a year, all right? So if you use a little bit of authentic materials to keep your students happy, at least once a while, maybe once a month, to give them a homework assignment in which they read what they choose for themselves, but you need to start now. It's a process. It's going to take 3 years, 4 years, maybe 5 years, right? Step by step. And it's a skill which is teachable, but it's also a skill which is important and useful. And it's not just my opinion. In some places in the world, for example, in Great Britain, as you can see, this is the 15th of July, 2019, news item, that schools are in different parts of the world, for example, in Great Britain, are considering introduction of parts, at least some courses, or as parts of their general sort of reading syllabus, something like distinguishing facts from false information, facts from fake news, because they realize that this is a huge problem for our students and for our children. And I think teaching them to distinguish facts from opinions is something we can start with. Okay? And not only is it important and useful, but first of all, it's teachable as long as you start it now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Now, this is all very, very intensive. So before I hand over to trainer number 4, I have a little relief, I hope, and the relief comes now. Right, so the relief is over, and we continue with the program. Time has come to ask Dr. Klaus Kinski, also known as Czesław Kinski, come on, to talk about indirect information or implicity, as I am told. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so hand over to Klaus.
So nobody listens to the guy in the middle, and I think, well, you've had the relief, now it's time for the heavy part. And I'm going to ask you to answer 3 very explicit questions, but when people don't react, I never know whether they're not voting or not interested. So this time, if the answer is yes, please wave, and I can see you, right? So yes, and if the answer is no, fold your arms. All right, let's practice. Yes, wave, no, great. Okay, so have you got children? Mm-hmm. Are you in a relationship? Not asking for myself, just asking, okay, and question 3, do you have friends? Yeah, okay then. So, when you talk to those people, when you talk to your children, when you talk to your partners and friends, do you sometimes say things implicitly, hoping they will understand the message? Yeah. Still voting, thanks. Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 situations, 3 types of interactions, and 3 very implicit statements, and I would like you to think to yourself, you can share it with your partner, this beautiful person sitting next to you, as to what you think the explicit content is, okay? So here is the first one. A mother talking to a child, or a father. What do you think the message is? I think it's something like this. Right? Have you ever said that to your kids, yeah? Okay, especially if it's like, the 6th drawing in the last 10 seconds. Okay, here is the next one, a person, well, a woman talking to her partner. Yeah, breaking up. Okay, so here's what I thought it means. Yeah. Okay, and finally, the last one is a real example what I overheard, just by accident, in a pub once. Have you ever felt that way? Yeah. So I think this is the message, okay? So implicity is a part of, human life. Implicity is, is so important everywhere. And I think, my brief 15, 20 minutes, well, it's going to be important not only to your students and their Matura, but, this may also save relationships, and this may also save lives. But implicity is complicated, because when you analyze implicity, it's composed of many linguistic, so to speak, sub-phenomena or micro skills, because it's connected with intonation, with summary skills, which you've just practiced, with understanding intention, dealing with a variety of semantic frames, etc., etc. If this isn't looking too complicated, sometimes those phenomena will overlap. Sometimes you'll have 3 or 4 or all of them, in implicity. And I'd like you to read that quote, please. So my point is going to be that even though implicity is usually tested in passive competence tasks, like listening and reading, students who can use it actively in speaking and writing will be better able to spot it in passive competence tasks. Will you agree? This interesting piece of science. Thank you. I think we can move on. So I think, if you can use intonation effectively, you'll be more able to spot it when, people say something, yeah, oh, that's great, okay? All right, so when you have a task like this, what is the speaker doing, right? Is the speaker giving information, describing, etc.? Of course, in Matura, at a high level, you can't really expect the speaker to say something like, okay, so now I'm giving advice Or you can't expect the speaker to say, now I'm recommending things, okay? Because, it's going to be like, a variety of language functions, etc. How can you practice that with your students? Well, one of the simplest things I can do, and I do with my students, is that, I give them like different slips of paper, and there'll be like, different language functions on them, right? So it's like, give advice about traveling, describe a place, but it must be specific, not just describe something, but describe a place, etc. And there's always like a multitude of those cards, and then, everyone draws a card without telling anybody else, what the function is. Now, what they have to do is they have to speak for 1 minute on that subject. It's active, right? So they have to speak for 1 minute, have to prepare that, of course, beforehand. Have to speak for 1 minute, and the partner or partners in the group, like, 3 people, 4 people, will have to decide at the end, what the speaker is doing. And now, of course, it happens a lot that, they either get something wrong or the speaker wasn't communicative enough. In other words, the speaker was supposed to criticize a film, and, what she did was describe a film. And then they can argue. The more they argue, the better, okay? Because the whole point is, for them to have this, beautiful learning moment, okay? What you can do as a follow-up or as a possible extension of that is that you can only focus, for example, on giving advice, and those cards may be like give advice about choosing a restaurant, give advice about traveling, give advice about this and that, etc. This way, you don't practice the language functions, you practice the semantic frames, okay? Or you can reverse it, and you can say that, today we're practicing the functions, so the students can have cards with give information about the film, criticize a film, recommend the film. Everything is about the film, but the functions are different, all right? Now, when you have a task like this, with a question, what does the woman do and who is she speaking to? Of course, once again, in Matura, it's very unlikely that the woman, in the recording, will explicitly say, I'm a scientist and I'm going to recommend things to you. Did you get that? I'm going to repeat that. Okay, not gonna happen. Okay, so what I do once again is the students have, a variety of cards with language functions, but this time I also give them like the roles they will have to play. Would you be able to spot those roles? Obviously a gymnast, a young mother, this guy, a rock musician, and this one? One of the first Google images for middle-aged teacher. Okay. Anyway, this one is more time-consuming, but it's Matura, and we shouldn't be afraid of teaching. So what I do is I tell my students, now we have more time. I just have to write something like 100 words, a little script, in which you draw a card with a person, you draw a card with a function. So it takes a lot of processing, right? They have to think a lot. But as I think Dr. Cichmińska said, and I like that, thank you, you have to get into the minds of CKE to understand what they really want. And if you get inside their minds, then you'll be better able to deal with examination tasks. So students who can deal with those tasks, who can prepare those tasks for their peers, will be better able to deal with these in the exam, when the exam day comes, okay? So then they have like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, they write down 100 words, and they have to, again, present this little speech or present, this piece to their peers in the group. And the others will have to decide, first of all, who is speaking and identify the clues. Like, I know it's a young mother because you used words like this or that, right? And, if you think about convincing someone that something is right, you might have like different messages from the rock guitarist, from a young mother, etc., etc. So then, of course, once again, if your students work together and, Krzyś tells Zosia, well, I couldn't make out who that was because there were not enough clues, it's also a message to Zosia that next time, perhaps, she should put more clues. And the idea is that, they will be better able to see that in the exam. Okay, next thing is, think if we want our students to deal with implicity, we should allow them to have opportunities for critical thinking and also abstract thinking. Have you ever heard of Ig Nobel Prizes? It's like the prizes, awarded to scientists of various fields for doing useless, crazy research, okay? So why not? Well, you can use the same cards. Okay, we have to economize on time. And well, you've got a few of the winners, okay? So in the last couple of years, the winners were scientists who found out or who did research on how to turn old ammunition into diamonds. There was a guy who invented a speed jammer, a device that lets your interlocutor know that they have been speaking for too long and it jams their voice. Don't practice that now, okay? The effect of fabrics on love life. So is silk really that sexy? Unboiling an egg. Can you unboil an egg? So there was like a guy who did research on that, right? And there was, also research done into whether drunk people perceive themselves as more attractive, themselves, not other people, okay? Finally, there was research proving, fact or opinion, that people who are night owls are psychopaths. Okay, so once again, you tell your students, okay, so you've got, the winners, you've got those people. Now, make a case for who would benefit from which, finding, which type of research the most. Try and prove that, okay? Finally, there's this moment when we have to deal with issues which are controversial. And very often, we tend to present our own point of view in the classroom, which is great because it's called education. But at the same time, I think when you choose a controversial topic, like, let's say, environmental issues, veganism, or something, this is something I actually tried myself. You play your students an extract from the film, for example, Cowspiracy, found on Netflix, no commercial here. And at the same time, you show them, or you give them like a script from an internet opinion forum presenting the opposite point of view. So not only do they have like both points of view, but you also tell them to analyze the language used both in the film and in the script, because you know that many times we present things in a very emotional way. Even facts may be presented with the employment of emotive language. And say, a figure of 90%, or you can say a staggering figure of 90%, okay? So then, your students work in groups, and it is challenging, it is time-consuming. They work in groups, and they identify the language used by the makers of the film, and also used by the people who commented on that film online, okay? And when you have to analyze someone's language, that's the moment when you become really good at spotting this, when it happens, okay? So my point here is that, even though implicity in Matura is tested in reading and listening, we have to teach our students to be able to use implicity. Because, it's a life-saving skill as well, okay? So interacting with such a fantastic audience has given me an experience that has been not only inspirational, but also forever to be remembered. Alas, due to various constraints, most of which are of temporal nature, I'm afraid that I will have to start closing. Nevertheless, I hope that our paths cross again in the days to come. On a final note, let me finish with a quote from none other than Barack Obama, and let me express my deep gratitude for addressing this convention.
Oh my. Okay. This is most telling, I have to say. All right, continuing with the program, we move on swiftly to textual skill number 5, and any decent film festival could not do without Meryl Streep, and in that role we have got Karolina Katarowicz-Rosińska, who's going to talk about summarizing the text.
Thank you.
Rosińska?
Yes, it's whatever. All right. Now, I'm pretty sure that you will agree with me that, well, given the character of this event and the fact that we are pressed for time, what really matters for me right now is that I keep it short. And funnily enough, this is exactly what I'm going to talk about within the next 20 minutes. For the next 20 minutes, like I said, I am going to focus on the skill summarizing. This is what I'm going to introduce to you today, or perhaps I shall say summarizing, right? Because in those three words, those three words are the acronym of what really matters in summarizing, but in very general and broad terms. In other words, if you want to summarize a text, you first of all need to shorten it, right? The summary is into pieces for you, dismantle it in a more academic way, and in order to do that, I'd like to use the taxonomy developed by Graebe, right? And this taxonomy divides the comprehension processes into two major groups. One is called lower level processes, the other one higher level processes, something that Marta has already pinpointed pretty well. This is the first one will be understanding words or reading for words. The second one will be reading for comprehension or reading for meaning. Now, I feel that it is mandatory that something be explained at this point. Well, Graebe is a theoretician, a scholar who researches reading and reading skills, and he developed that taxonomy with reading skills in mind. However, from a cognitive point of view, and that's what I would like to do today, take you on a kind of short cognitive trip, right? From the cognitive point of view, the skills of comprehension, understanding skills are exactly the same whatever the mode, be it spoken or written. Comprehension skills are the same whatever the language, whatever the code. So the skills that I'm going to talk about are the same in Polish, in English, in speaking, in listening and in reading, okay? Having said that, let us focus on what you can see on this particular slide. First of all, on the left side, you've got the lower level processes. Let me underline at this point that lower here does not mean less important or easier. On the contrary, lower level processes, which are all about decoding the language, that is understanding the words, phrases and sentences, are the absolute minimum, the kind of the starting point for any comprehension, for any text comprehension to take place. This is something that Jacek talked about in greater detail. You need to understand the words. However, as you can most probably guess at this point, this is far from enough when you want to summarize a text. And in order to summarize a text, a learner, a student, a reader or a listener has to be pretty good at the higher level processes as well. In other words, you need to focus on the main ideas. You need to build a certain model text of comprehension. This is the idea of a text that remains in your mind, in your memory, after you've read something or after you have listened to it, okay? Again, higher level processes does not mean that they are, I don't know, more important or harder, although quite often they are. What it really means is that they require a certain conscious introspection on the part of the reader. There is no sliding over a text. You need to go deeply into that particular text, like I said, be it spoken or written. And mind you that in real life, this is exactly what we do. When you read an interesting article in your real life, there are rarely some comprehension questions that follow that you need to answer or tick yes or no, right? What happens is that you read it, you keep some kind of recollection in your mind of that particular text and of that information. And when the time comes, like a topic appears in a social conversation, right? This is when you said, there's something interesting that I've recently read about, okay? So those higher level processes actually reflect the way we read and listen to, or we, in general terms, we process texts in real life. Now let me, because at this point it kind of might sound a bit daunting as to something to be developed in the classroom, right? So let me translate this into more human terms. In other words, what does the reader need to do to summarize a text? Well, when you read a text, you first need to decode the language, and that's a must. Then you need to pinpoint the main ideas, determine what is really important in it, and build that text model in your mind. And mind you, that all of these refer to reception. But well, summarizing is not just that, because what follows is that you need to use your own words to paraphrase that model, right, of a text, and you need to transpose it, in other words, use it in a different context, say it in different words, shorten it at some point, right? So, Krzysiek, I really know that you said that your skill was the most complex and the most difficult, but somehow I feel that this is the skill of summarizing that is, well, extremely complex, because it not only entails reception, but also a great deal of production. I am going to add a few bits and pieces to it, because if you want to summarize a spoken text, you need to add some memorization to it, because, well, due to the ephemeral nature of listening, there is no way to refer back to what you have read or what is in the text, right? And, surprise, surprise, a little bit of note-taking. Now, I'm pretty sure that you can see now how complex the skill of summarizing actually is. And this is why I believe it cannot be taught or developed as one entity. It's absolutely impossible. This is, by the way, why students don't know how to summarize texts, right? Because nobody teaches them those bits and pieces. I'm not talking about English. I'm talking about all the other subjects, right? Students don't know. They read a text in history, they can't summarize it. They read a text in Polish, they don't know how to summarize it. So here's my remedy. Why don't we focus on several bits and pieces which are teachable, manageable in the classroom, and make this complex skill of summarizing a bit more down to earth. Now, what do we do and how do we go about that behind classroom doors? To begin with, we might use a effective, well-balanced course book material, right? And I will start with just that. First, I'm going to present a few examples from Password Reset and then from Checkpoint, how the skill of summarizing is developed in these two courses. Let me start with Password. You will find a number of activities in which students have to write their own summary or complete a ready-made template of a summary. What can we do about such texts in the classroom? Well, you ask students to read the text. This is a text about neuroplasticity, mind you, not skim the text and not scan it, but carefully read it. Before students engage in writing or completing a template of a summary, if you want to provide some extra help, you might ask some signpost questions. Signpost questions provide some kind of a guideline. They help students navigate through texts. For instance, what is the text about? What do you learn from it? What examples of recovery does the author give? Particular questions to a particular text, which, you know what they will help students do? Well, adopt a certain bird's eye view of the text. Look at the text holistically, not on the particular words and phrases in it, right? Why? Why is it that so important? Because this is how you build a text model of comprehension in your mind. The next step that follows is for students to complete a summary of the text that they have read in exercise 3. A very important comment that I'd like to make at this point is that those signpost questions do not need to be in English at all, right? Signpost questions such as, o czym jest tekst? Odpowiedź maksymalnie 4 słowami. O jakich 2 faktach informuje ten tekst? Will help us develop the same skill. Mind you, from the cognitive point of view, the skill of summarizing is exactly the same, whatever the language and whatever the mode, okay? Such signpost questions will be particularly important for one extra reason. This is the type of task that chances are our students will have to do in the new format of the exam. This is, we haven't seen the format yet, but knowing what happened in the 8th graders exam this year, knowing what, the new core curriculum includes, chances are that students will read a text or 2 texts in English, and they will have to complete their summary or its summary in Polish. Okay? Now, another example of summarizing is the following. Now, I would say that Marta here has done a great job of kind of developing that skill of summarizing from a cognitive point of view. Marta is the author of the course book that I'm talking about. Perhaps I should add that, right? That the skill of summarizing is kind of developed in a way that, it is extremely probable that students will read or listen to an English text and will have to report on it using their mother tongue. All right then. One more example, this time paraphrasing, right? I said that one of the elements of writing a good summary is also the skill of paraphrasing. We obviously, develop that skill of paraphrasing in all sorts of use of English activities. Thank you. In all sorts of use of English activities, but, and this is what you will find in Password Reset, students are expected to do that. Listen to the sentences 1 to 6, and then paraphrase the information to complete the sentences below, right? Mind you that 3 of them are in English, but the last 3 are in Polish. And these are the kinds of activities that will prepare our students, and this is someone stubborn. Okay, they will help our students develop the skill of summarizing both in English and in Polish. Now off to Checkpoint. I would say that one of the greatest assets of this course book is the fact that it teaches this or develops the skill of note-taking in a very systematic way, for which I believe Monica takes credit here, right? So, in Checkpoint, students will have to take notes, listen to text, and take notes for a number of reasons. For example, here, complete a summary of the recording. Or, like in this one, complete the main points of the text that they hear. Or, like in this particular exercise, students are expected to note down, to take notes in the definitions. An interesting exercise, there is a recording about two types of people, and then the activity that follows is the following. In your own notebook, summarize in 3 sentences why being broad-minded can make you a happy person, using the information from number 3, that is using your notes, right? So mind you that this summarizing is not about just, read the text and write a summary. This is put down into pieces. A little bit of paraphrasing, a little bit of sentence completion, a little bit of note-taking, changing your notes into 3, 4, or 5 sentence summary. Now, what happens if your activities do not offer such a choice of, if the course book that you work with do not offer such a choice of activities? In other words, what else matters, right? And now I'd like to present a few activities which are, easily implemented into your lesson scenario without much preparation, so they can be completely impromptu, and which will also help you develop the skill of summarizing and help your students, score or nail the Matura exam. For example, in this particular text, students read a text about a guy who invented a pill which is likely to replace food in the future. Mind you, what would happen if you read this in your real life? You are having decoded the language, right? You would probably engage in some higher level processes. That is, determine the main ideas, build a text model of comprehension, so keep a recollection of that text, keep those main ideas in your head, and the next time the subject comes up in a social situation, look, there's an interesting article that I've read, okay? And you are going to summarize it, right? Now, I'm giving this example because it shows that summarizing is a very natural thing, and it's a part of how we read in everyday life. Hence, the natural responses, or encouraging students to respond to a text in a natural kind of everyday casual way, will also help them develop the skill of summarizing. For instance, what surprised you or what shocked you the most in that particular text? Would you consider changing your diet at all, right? We might also, the same version of natural responses by Deller and Watley, finish the sentences. I'd like to know more about what I found the most incredible in the article is that, and so on, okay? One more example of a activity that promotes summarizing texts, summarizing written text, is text reconstruction. For example, students read a text about, this one is about some kind of movement in San Francisco. You ask them to read the text and underline the key information, then write the information on a separate piece of paper so that students can close the book and look at the text no more. Then ask them to look those use the key information in order to write a summary of the text, okay? And this is just that you present a summary, you create a summary, but you use your own notes. How about spoken texts, right? Again, I believe in the power of note-taking. This is what I wrote my PhD thesis on, to be honest. Now, one of the activities that you might actually introduce is to ask students to listen with their books closed, right? Okay. Look what happens. You tell them, okay, you're going to listen to a recording, open your books, and instead of really listening, instead of building a text model of comprehension like we do normally in the cognitive science kind of way, students just focus on those detailed questions. Let's skip that. Not skip that. Let's leave it for later. First, play the recording and ask students to just listen to the recording and take notes. Then listen to the recording, take notes, and summarize the text using your own notes. If you feel that this might be a bit too challenging for your learners, you might kind of reverse the order and provide the notes for your learners. On the board, before students listen to the recording, on the board, write the keywords from the text that students are about to listen, okay? With their books closed, students listen to the recording, and what they really do is focus on the information, on the meaning. These keywords are supposed to, guide them through the text and help them or navigate them through the text. What happens later on, with the book still closed, keep the detailed questions for later, ask students now to use what they remember and the words on the board to tell you what the text was about, right? In other words, create a short summary. If, after all, you decide to add a little bit of extra challenge, why not ask students to use those words in English to create a short summary in Polish, okay? Because like I said, from the cognitive point of view, understanding text is the same, whatever the language, that is, whatever the code and whatever the mode. So, in short, and again, a short summary, right? So, what is it that I believe we need to remember about when we need to help learners develop the skill of summarizing, which I'm sure that you will agree with me at this point, is kind of complex. To begin with, encourage natural responses, because this is what we do in real life. In real life, we build a text model of comprehension in our minds, right? Cognitively and with natural responses like this. So what do you think about the text? Which of the facts from this article would you, pass on to your friend who is interested in something, and so on. Then ask for text reconstruction. Shorter version, longer version, make it limited. I don't know, how many characters are you allowed to use on Twitter? It used to be 40. Now I'm not sure, I've heard that it's been changed. But you might ask for a text reconstruction which would, fit a Twitter post. And finally, whatever course book that you work with, always have your minds open and exploit the course book material that is already there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, wow, that's going to be hard to beat. Okay, now, last but not least, right, we come to presenting information. And you know what? I thought in order to begin this, I'm going to sort of take you on a reverse journey. What is this? Well, this is most of the slides that we've already covered in the process of today. And what I would like to draw your attention to at this point is the fact that the slides are the result of something that began with something like this. Okay, so you know, at the beginning was the word, right? And the word was autorzy nowej podstawy programowej. In other words, what we could have done, but I hope we didn't, what we could have done is take this solid piece of text and relate to you this text more or less verbatim, right? But of course we haven't. And even though this text is already some sort of regurgitation of the original nowa podstawa programowa, I think it sort of stands to reason that any attempt to simply deliver this information in its original format would not quite do the job. Do you agree? So what is it that we have actually done? Well, in order to arrive at 150 slides out of a solid block of text, we have performed a certain number of operations on the original text, which all are part and parcel of presenting information effectively. Of course, I say effectively, hoping that you agree that this is an effective way to do it. And of course, you are the ultimate judges of that. But what I am trying to show you is that whether we have ultimately been successful or not, we have tried our very best to do what? Well, first and foremost, can you help me? To draw certain conclusions from the original text. Next, we certainly needed to read between the lines. We also needed, and a lot, to distinguish the real hard facts from, well, and other sorts of things that were either said directly or not, and that's bullet number 2. Needless to add, there's a significant amount of, and you know what I'm driving at, we also, if this is successful, then we have also needed to work out some sort of sequence with this information. And that's what the original 5 sessions have been about, haven't they? And now I hope you realize that the reason why I am number 6 is because, despite what Carolina said, this is the most complex skill. No, I'm kidding. Now, all of these are important, and I'm very happy to say that when I started flipping through the pages of the 2 courses that are the original inspiration behind the event today, I found, amongst others, a very good way of thinking about what it really takes to present information. This is what Monica calls integrating skills in all of those sections in Checkpoint, where she always takes this as a final integrating skill behind all of the other things, and by this I mean taking all the linguistic input, all the information presented in the unit, all the skills that are micro skills that I just showed you on the preceding slide, and arriving with luck at something which will be effective, interesting, and engaging to the audience. Speaking of which, I have a little eye test for you to perform. Take a look. I wonder if you can read this. What does it say? Knowledge made, isn't it? But you know what? This is actually the wrong way around if you want an effective presentation. Why? Because an effective presentation really isn't primarily about knowledge. What is it primarily about? You see? Okay, so it doesn't matter what knowledge I have got, or it does not matter the most I should say, what knowledge you have got. What matters the most is whether I am able to effectively communicate this knowledge to you. Does it make sense? All right. Well, of course, the question as always is how. And this gentleman, whom I hope you've recognized, was no doubt a master of doing that effectively. Do you agree? Well, I should add a little proviso here, which is that the late or the later Steve Jobs, he's now both, sadly. No, but what I'm trying to say is that when you watch his original presentations, you know, when he started with Apple, they weren't as wonderful as the ones which he, you know, became so famous for. In other words, it's, again, even his own history as a presenter is a history of arriving at a certain way to communicate information really effectively. And there could be many different ways of saying what it is that was this magic formula, but to me, after years and years of trying to present information myself and coaching other people to do that, I think this really is the key word. What he became a master of is the master of giving people a reason to listen. And how do you give people a reason to listen? Well, instead of just telling them what you know, you pick on one key thing which they really want to hear. Does it make sense to you? Can I show you how it can be done behind classroom doors? Take a wonderful example, one of those integrating the skills sections from Checkpoint, which, as you've already seen, they always culminate with an invitation for students to arrive at the presentation. A typical task will be something like this. For the next class, prepare a short presentation with a partner on how, in this case, on how Polish and British teenagers aged 14 to 16 spend their free time. Now, you can probably imagine what a typical student will go through here. There will be, of course, certain tips in the book for how this can be done effectively. What I want to show you, however, is something which you can do to help the student really make this presentation jobs-like. Would you like to see? What you need to get the student to understand is that there is a crucial difference, fundamental difference, between the topic of this presentation, which is, again, what? Do a presentation on how Polish and British teenagers aged 14 to 16 spend their life. And notice, the question is, do you really want to hear about how British and Polish teenagers aged 14 to 16 spend their lives, honestly? Yeah, Marta does, but Marta's crazy, so she doesn't count. What I'm trying to say is that there is a topic, and there is an aim, or there is a goal, or there is a message. And this is what Jobs was a master of. He always thought through the reason why the audience would listen to it. What does this mean in this context? Well, let me show you, for instance, a reason that perhaps another student might want to listen about teenagers spending time in Poland and in Britain. What if this was the real message of this presentation? How does it end, do you think? 2/3 of British teens spend their free time in, where do you think? I'm already hearing certain suggestions, and I'm very happy. Now I'm going to show you. Has it got significantly more interesting now? Notice it still addresses that topic. That's what I'm trying to show you. There's a big difference between just doing the topic and coming up with a message which will be genuinely engaging to the audience. Is this teachable? Of course it is. I would not be wasting my breath if it weren't, okay? So how could we teach this with the students? Well, you know, let's take that very same presentation again, okay? And let's first give them a few alternative examples so that they can see that this is doable. Such as what? Angielskie nastolatki mają znacznie gorzej niż polskie. Does it still address the main topic? Well, it does, but now I've given them a reason to listen, yes? Okay. Another alternative to show them that it's completely doable. If they run out of ideas, that's what they should be searching for on the internet, which, by the way, Monica encourages in all of these tasks, except, I would argue, it's nice to give them a reason to do that. Another example from me In the UK chłopaki robią to samo, co w Polsce, za to dziewczyny. Now, I'm not telling you whether it's true or not. I'm just showing you that I'm giving the listener a reason to listen. Does it make sense? Okay, and you know what happens at point 3? At point 3, I stop giving them examples because I've given them enough, I think. So point 3 is where I tell them, okay, your idea. Okay, so now either work individually or work in pairs or work in a small group and try and take on that very same topic and come up with at least one more enticing reason for another person to listen to you. Does it make sense? I hope you see that this is not only, or perhaps even not primarily, something that they need in order to actually get a 5 from you. This is important when they want to take this as a skill and use it in life, when they want to pitch their idea, when they want to present their research results, when they want to get a grant and they want to win over other candidates, you see. So it's a genuine life skill. But lesson number 1 for that skill is you need to engage, because if they do not start listening to you, chances are they will not continue doing so. Does it make sense? Do you think it's teachable? It would be. But you know, it takes a wonderful teacher to spot that crucial difference and to exploit that potential. Okay? It's sitting there for you to be used. Speaking of engaging students or engaging other people, really, I think lesson number 2, based on that, is perhaps inspired by this, which is a modern way of saying, you know what, yeah? What is the original expression, the original saying? That a picture, right, is worth 1,000 words. So this is the modern way. Now, whether it's electronic or digital, whether it's not, I think the point remains. And what is the second point, the second lesson I would like you to take away here when it comes to presenting information effectively? Well, information these days clearly isn't or is no longer purely textual, or perhaps not even primarily textual. So, in order for students to devise effective presentation and deliver them effectively, they have to learn to exploit visuals. Absolutely fundamental, okay? How can we teach that? Again, let's take a real example, shall we? Imagine a topic that goes, the role of new technologies in modern communication. It's not a target, not an aim, it's just a topic. But before I even turn this into one of those, you know, Steve Jobs-like reasons for people to listen, imagine that I first of all want to illustrate the point I want to make with a photo, a picture, okay? Where do I find these pictures? Well, initially, you will find these good pictures in a good book, like Marta's in this case. In Password Reset, I found those 2 photographs in one unit devoted to presentation giving, and I think the task that accompanies this particular set of photographs is lovely. The task says, very simply, given that topic, which of the 2 photographs do you say answers or addresses the topic better? The role of new technologies in modern communication. Which of these 2 deals with the topic better? The author is saying justify, well, and she's, you know, killing my point, but never you mind, okay? Because you're already doing that activity, and I'm very happy, because notice, of course, it can be one or the other, or even both, depending on what it is that you really want to say. Does it make sense? So, what you are training students here is, okay, you want a visual that will carry your message the best, okay? That message, as I say, can come from the help of a material, of a visual taken directly from a good course book. It can come from somewhere else. I'll give you an example in a moment. But notice that this is the beginning of a structure. What kind of structure? Well, once you know which one, then perhaps, Marta said justify, but not just justify the choice of one, but equally importantly, justify the rejection of the other. In other words, get your head around what is it that you're really trying to say about modern communication. Is modern communication about people doing things? Or is it about people having fun and interacting with others? Or is it both? Or is it either? You see, have something interesting to say and then illustrate it with a picture. Speaking of illustrating with a picture, this is also a great way to tell the students if you are so inclined, again, do an internet search and find something which perhaps illustrates your point even better. But first, you need to have that point, then you choose the visual that will support that point. Am I making sense again? Do you see how this is completely teachable? You start with something which is already prepared for you, and then gradually you take students to be more and more autonomous and independent. But they need to learn the power of visualization. And that's my lesson number 2. Okay? Lesson number 3, in a sense, is a direct consequence of lesson number 1 and lesson number 2. I should have said, perhaps, that the difference between the way that presentations are treated in the 2 courses is that Monica calls them integrating skills, and Marta, fascinatingly, typically includes them in the sections that develop speaking step by step. And of course, it's a wonderful way of sort of summarizing what I am to say here in my lesson 3. Because of course, on the one hand, you really need to integrate everything in order for the presentation to be maximally communicative, but clearly, without delivering it in speech, it will never happen to the full. So what I'm trying to show you is that looking at the sort of double barrel approach is a fantastic way of getting the key thing about presenting with the students. And speaking of building this as a skill, one of the things that Checkpoint and Password are both very good at is persuading the learner that, of course, giving a presentation in a sense of actually speaking, delivering it, is a matter of organizing not just the facts, information, but also the language which needs to happen along the way. And in this particular lesson, Marta is saying, look, as a learner, you really deserve to have a lot of support in how you organize all of this language that's needed for choosing a picture, giving the reason, rejecting a picture, giving a reason. If you are able to do that, your presentation is already taking shape. And you know what? The language is also sitting there for you to be exploited. Because again, it's a process. No one expects them to be able to just, deliver it straight away. It really needs to be built step by step. And this is an example from an earlier part of the course where they are still relatively reliant on information and on support coming from a wonderful piece of teaching material. And to finish off, I want to say that, that this building a complex skill like presenting step by step is clearly a fantastic illustration of this quote from Douglas Biber. The quote is already 30 years old, isn't it? But it feels very fresh, doesn't it? This idea of, how do you persuade the learner that there is still something to learn? Well, get them to do something that they are not familiar with. It's a lovely thing for any kind of teaching, but certainly true of presentation giving. And in this particular case, you might say, but the fact, for instance, that there is a presentation after each unit of Checkpoint might mean that after a while, the genre will become familiar. So they will say, well, I know how to do it. I just say, to begin with this and to continue that, and in conclusion, something. And to shake the learner out of this false sense of security, I suggest we can do something else that I would really like to recommend for my final lesson. And it is, okay, once they've become relatively comfortable with the basic presentation format, there is no reason why we could not give them something just a touch more challenging. And this is my final tip for you today. What is this something? Well, this is something which I became a great fan of several years ago. The idea isn't mine. The idea originally comes from the world of architecture, where this presentation format, the name is very weird. Various pronunciations circulate, Pechakucha, Pehakucha, Petrachka, yes, and various others. But what is special about this presentation format is how constricted it is. The idea originally came from the world of architecture, where, those poor people that had to listen through endless pitches given by, one architectural firm after another, finally came up with this idea of, okay, well, this just can't go on like this, okay? It has to be democratic, and it has to be very, very rigid. So what they came up with is the format where everybody only had 20 slides, strictly 20 slides, and each of these slides critically rotated after 20 seconds without the speaker's control. Okay? So, you know, you set in PowerPoint, for instance, you set the timer on automatic, what's the word, on rotation after 20 seconds, and it auto-runs. So everybody only gets 6 minutes and 40 seconds, and then they need to sit down. How does that sound? Yeah, it sounds great, it sounds scary, it sounds all of these things. It's certainly something which, unless you've tried it, really is something which you might say is almost impossible to do, because notice you have to time your script perfectly so that you only have 20 seconds of it every time. Okay? Now, this idea got adopted by the world of ELT by somebody called Lindsay Clanfield about 10 years ago, and for several years there were very effective Pecha or Petrachka nights at IATEFL conferences, including in Poland, where people took on that challenge. Now, the challenge is great because, you know, as you can easily realize, the most important moment is when you run out of text and the slide doesn't rotate. Or when you have too much text and the slide rotates too quickly. Now, to show you that this is completely accessible given training to a learner, I thought I would give you a sample of a real learner actually attacking that challenge. Would you like to see?
I'm going to talk about dance. What is dance about? It actually depends on a person. Probably for some people it is not anything special or important, just entertainment or something interesting to watch from time to time. But for me it is a way to express myself, a kind of a self-development, exercising my body, staying fit. What is more, it is also something which distracts me from school and from notorious tests.
Did you notice?
It is also something that I can base my future on. For me, dance is a more efficient way of communication among people than talking. Of course, not in case we want to say something casual. For example, make me a sandwich or take me to school.
Now she wants it to move and it doesn't, you see?
Whatever. Okay. Dancing, especially ballet, is a hard body exercise. Although dancers look like it is pleasant and easy for them to lift their legs and stay still in different positions, it is actually a huge physical effort. All dancers have bigger muscles than tennis players or footballers.
And so on. Okay, now you can see, I hope you saw those two critical moments. One was when she obviously ran out of time, right? And the other, equally interesting, is when she keeps on going and the slide's not moving. Hello, move. Okay, you really appreciate the power of a second. You honestly do. Now, you might say, well, this is a lot of work. Well, it is. So what I would like to suggest to you as a way to approach this step by step is a mini Pecha. How could that work? Well, you give them, for instance, 8 slides each to design. They each still last 20 seconds, which means that everybody has got 2 minutes and 40 seconds exactly. Why am I showing you this? Because this also means that it's completely doable in terms of presenting it in the classroom without losing the momentum. Now, the hard work of writing up the script, trying it out, seeing if it fits, well, that's all the skills that we talked about, particularly summarizing, of course, which shows that perhaps Session 5 was well timed before Session 6. Now, speaking of timing, I am running out of time, but I want to say that with this mini Pecha especially, I hope you can see that the whole point of delivering it successfully is rehearsing it. Okay, and I'm giving them a very obvious reason to rehearse. But they rehearse not because I wanted them to, they rehearse because if they so do, they will inevitably process this language over and over. If they decide, for instance, that they have got too much text, they have to do something with the text, you see. If they have too little text, they have to add a little in order to fit whatever the amount of time you give them. Okay? Now, this is almost it, but being a boring teacher, I need to check whether you've been listening. So my lesson number 3 was rehearse, and everybody remembers because it's short-term memory. What was lesson 2 about? Okay, visualization, and lesson number 1 was about engagement. Okay, so if you can get these 3, you are certainly moving towards more effective presentations with your learners. I only had 20 minutes, and like Marta, I hate 20-minute slots, but I've done something else, and I would like to present this to you here. I've done a 5-episode mini-series on how to power your point, therefore deliver effective presentations for secondary learners, not for teachers, for secondary learners. And the course is already available, or will be very shortly, on Macmillan service for all our wonderful customers, people who will be using our 2 wonderful courses. So if you would like more on this, this is where you'll find it. And that's all from me. So thank you very much for being such a Thank you for being such a lovely audience, even though I could hardly see anybody else, but that's, it's a running joke here. Now, time has come to summarize, and I hope that in the process of today, we have persuaded you with all the wonderful examples that we have offered, all 6 of us, we have offered from the 2 courses, that indeed it is these 2 that do this job very, very well and very, very systematically. As I said at the beginning, don't trust us. Facts from opinion, right? Check for yourselves. You have got a ready-made checklist which you are more than welcome to use and flip through the pages of the 2 courses to decide which one is more to your liking. You can also check it with any other course, and you will see that Checkpoint and Password Reset really do a fantastic job compared to anybody else out there. It's also my pleasure at the end to say that the 6 sessions that you have just experienced are not going away because of all the fantastic streaming technology. So very shortly they will be available as 6 separate video installments for you to enjoy, and I'm sure we will post them on our roadmap to Matura 2023 service, and you are more than welcome to go back and re-watch them, maybe take further notes if needed. We realized that this was very, very fast moving, but we also hope that this made it quite energetic, and as such we were able to fit in quite a lot of information for you in one day. To say goodbye, I just want to sort of rephrase, or perhaps I should say paraphrase, some of the things that have been said today. We started out by me asserting that this conference really is about how you process information. Remember? Linguistic, communicative, textual, factual, etc. And if you do this right, maybe you will be helping your learners not only succeed in the exam, which of course is important, but ultimately, education isn't about exams, is it? It's about something else. So perhaps you will simply help them be more responsible citizens, better consumers of information, better readers. In other words, you will move them from only processing information superficially to something which could be described as actually getting knowledge out of this. And if you can, I think your mission as a fantastic language teacher will be even more profound than it otherwise would be, with or without Matura 2023. And to add a slightly more light-hearted note to finish off, I also add one more picture here, since I preach visualization, and I want to say that there is always an element of creativity, novelty, fun, which is where wonderful teaching always relies in. So I hope that with the ideas that we've given you today, we've also provided you with a little bit of inspiration for the coming months, and that you will be able to make your lessons even more exciting as a result. And this is the moment where I would just like to say, on behalf of all of us today, thank you very much indeed. And good luck with your teaching and learning. Good luck from Macmillan, of course, and we hope to see you again very soon. Marta Rosińska, Jacek Łagun, Karolina Kotorowicz-Jasińska, Czesław, znany jako Klaus Kiński, i Monika Cichmińska. Dziękujemy bardzo. Grzegorz Śpiewak, tak, znany również jako Bradley Cooper. Dziękujemy Państwu jeszcze raz serdecznie i wszystkiego najlepszego w całym roku szkolnym. Dziękuję. Cierpliwości.